So if you remember our kind of journey, right, we started out with the person down here, and what did that symbolize again?
Prayer.
Start with prayer, that's right. And then we said we can't go right away to heart transformation, because why?
We don't know the context.
That's right, it wasn't written directly for us, right? So we need to first think about what did it mean for them, right? What was the author's point? And so we talked about genre over here. We talked about context. We just talked about structure, right? All as ways to get to the author's main point. But now I also talked about how we can't go straight from the author's point to transformation, right? We need to ask, how does this connect us to Jesus and the good news of Jesus, right? And the reason for this is because the Bible is one story from beginning to end with one capital A author, God, with one main hero, and that's Jesus, right? And so, an image to help us think about this is you've got these roads, and everything in the Bible eventually leads to Jesus. Now, some passages are more like main highways. It's like a direct, straight shot. It's so easy to see, right? Like Isaiah 53, like the suffering story, like that's a direct shot. There are other passages that feel like dirt roads, off of side roads, off of main roads, off of highways, okay? But if we learn to follow the roads, we can learn how it points us to Jesus, right? And we want to do this because it's what Jesus taught. And so I don't want you to take my word that we always need to see the Christ connection. I want us to look at Jesus' teaching. So flip over to, could someone read Luke 24, verses 44 to 45? And then could a second person read John 5, 39 to 40? So who wants to read Luke 24, 44, and 45?
24 and 25?
44 and 45.
44.
All right, Cindy's on Luke 24, verses 44 to 45. Who wants to do John 5, 39 to 40?
I have that.
All right, thanks, Louis. All right, so let's start with the Luke passage.
Okay. Luke 44, okay. Then he said, when I was with you before, is that the one?
Yep.
Okay. I told you everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and in the Psalms must be fulfilled. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures.
All right, so here we have Jesus saying, the law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the prophets, which in Jewish thinking is any book that had a prophet in it. So that includes Joshua, all the historical books, and what we call the prophets. And then the Psalms, which is their shorthand also for Psalms and all the wisdom books. So it's the whole Old Testament. And then he's saying, all of this points to me, and he opens their minds to understand it. Right? So Jesus is saying, if you want to understand the Old Testament, you have to see how it points to me. Right? All right, Louis, John 5, 39 to 40.
You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. And it is they that bear witness about me, yet you refuse to come to me that you may have life.
All right, so not only is he saying that in order to understand them, we have to see how they point to Jesus, but he's saying if the scriptures are going to have the transformative power in our lives to bring life, it's because we have to see how it points us to Jesus. And if we miss that, we're going to miss that they bring life to us, right? And this is in the context of him discussing with the Pharisees, and, they're saying, we know more than you. And he's like, well, you claim to know the scriptures, but you're missing how they point to me, right? So if we miss how the scriptures point us to Jesus, we're going to miss a lot. We're going to miss truly understanding them, but also we're going to miss the power of the scriptures transforming our hearts and lives, right? Because it's meant to bring us to Jesus, to recognize our need for him, and then we do whatever we learn from the scriptures in light of what Jesus has already done for us, right? So, because this transformation is going to be much more powerful when it's, so to speak, supercharged by the power of the gospel, all right? Now, the question we might have is, okay, I want to do this, but how do I do this? So a friend of mine came up with an acronym that summarizes some different ways to see the connections to Jesus. And it's great because it makes it a little easier to remember. So it's the Christ connection. So it's the acronym Christ. Right? And C is for command. So is the main point of the passage a command that Jesus has fulfilled and now enables us to fulfill. All right, so think about the command, forgive one another. If you try to do that apart from your connection to Christ, if you just try to do it on your own strength, it's not going to work. You try to do it on your own strength, you'll fail, you'll become legalistic, but it will not work. But if on the other hand, when you think, okay, I'm called to forgive, but you go, wow, isn't it amazing that Jesus did that for me? That he forgave me when I didn't deserve it. Jesus, would you help me now to pass that on to somebody else? Now all of a sudden, you're called to do the same thing. The command doesn't change, but the command is now empowered and motivated by the gospel of Jesus. And that's totally different. H stands for hope or promise, but promise didn't fit in the acronym. So, all right. So the idea is here, is there something in this passage that has a promise or hope that Jesus fulfills? Now, in the Old Testament, this would be looking ahead to Jesus. In the New Testament, it could be one of two ways. It could be that this passage looks backwards at an Old Testament promise and is showing us how Jesus fulfills it. Or it could be still looking at future promises to come, right? Because not all of the promises have been fulfilled in Jesus' first coming. Some of them are still to come in his second coming, right? So, you might have, right, like in Acts 2, when you read about Pentecost, and Peter quotes from Joel 2, this promise, right, of the day of the Lord and the Spirit being poured out. And you can go, yeah, this happened in Jesus, and it's looking back to an Old Testament promise. But we're also still looking ahead, because the day of the Lord that Joel talks about is when he comes back and makes everything right. And that hasn't quite happened yet, right? R is for recurring theme. Recurring theme. All right? So this idea is there a theme or a pattern for how God works that he's done several times across redemptive history, but is ultimately fulfilled in Jesus? So every time we see that pattern, it helps points to Jesus, or sometimes in the New Testament, they're looking back at the pattern to help explain Jesus, right? So in John 1, when John the Baptist says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. If you don't have any Old Testament background, you don't know what that means. But if you have your Old Testament background, you know there's a dead man walking. He's going to get killed to save us, right? So he's drawing back on this pattern to help you understand what Christ is really doing, right? And that's similar to T for type. So type would be if it's a person, a place, or a thing. So it's instead of just a general theme, like maybe God redeems through judgment, it's a more specific thing. So that example, the Passover lamb, maybe is a good example of type. Theme might be something more broadly, like God always works through the few. And you can see that pattern played out. I is for ill. Is there something that's gone wrong that only Jesus can fix? Okay. This is probably more common when you're in the Old Testament. Sometimes you read some stories in the Old Testament and it's like, there's no good moral lesson here. It's just brokenness. I think of the Tower of Babel. Humanity unites, they rebel, he scatters them. End of the story. What do you do with that story? It's just broken. Well, it's not broken forever, right? We see that brokenness and go, oh, every time we see brokenness that's unresolved, it's because the resolution's coming in Jesus. And you see it in Acts 2 and Pentecost, right? Whoa, the people can hear Jesus in different languages. And ultimately we see it in Revelation 7, when every language is gathered around the throne, right? Like that's the resolution for this ill, right? S is story. So does this passage, the main point of this passage, help advance the story of redemption? Or maybe does this look back on something key in the story of redemption to understand our Christ connection? So think about the story of Ruth, right? Boaz and Ruth have a baby boy. Obed, he's just a kid. Boaz is just a farmer. Ruth is just a random Moabite lady. Nothing, quote, special about them. They're very, very ordinary. Except it just so happens that their baby is, the grandfather of David, who's the great-great-great-grandfather of Jesus, right? So this thing that God's doing just in their life, he actually uses to advance the story of redemption. So it points forward to Jesus because it's pointing us ahead to what he's going to do long-term in the story. So these are different ways. So what you can do is you can take the main point of your passage and say, is this main point a command? Okay, if yes, how would that point me to Christ and what he's done for us and motivate us? Is the main point this hope or promise? Then maybe that's what I'm looking for. a recurring theme. It could be a couple, but a lot of times it's only maybe one. So it's not that all 5 of these are there in every one. It's just maybe different ways to try it out and see which one fits. Now, I will say that Christ Connection is one of the hardest ones to do initially because it just requires you to have a lot of data points, right? And you're connecting dots all over the Bible. And so don't be discouraged if at first it feels hard. The more you're reading the Bible, and that's why reading through the whole Bible in a year every once in a while is really great because you just get to a lot of data points. And then you'll be like, oh, I'm reading this thing that makes me think kind of this thing back here, right? And then you're kind of connecting the dots, right? Because you'll be like, oh yeah, that's right, lambs are killed a lot in the Old Testament. Okay, I'm making a connection now, right? So the more you're reading, you're going to start to see connections. The other thing I'll often share too is that kind of like in some transit systems, there's hubs where like all the buses come in or airplanes come into one and then you transfer out from there. There are certain passages in the Old Testament that are like hubs for all these promises. So like the promises to Abraham is like a big hub center. So like learn those well. The promises to David in 2 Samuel 7 is a big hub center. There's some key passages in the prophets that are like hub centers where these themes, like a lot of different themes run through just one passage. So those can be some good passages to start to learn and remember and say, okay, yeah, this is a good one to kind of keep in mind. So let's kind of think about Titus 1 as an example, and then I'll break you up to work on Titus chapter 2. So in Titus 1, right, we talked about how Paul commands Titus to appoint godly elders and correct false teaching for a healthy church. I'm just kind of roughly summarizing what we had talked about. All right, so Paul commands Titus to appoint godly elders and correct false teaching for a healthy church. All right, so as we think about this main point, which one of these things maybe stands out to you? Which one might be a good fit?
So I gave it away.
What?
You kind of gave it away. Commands.
A command, yeah. So yeah, I did. All right, Paul commands. I should have used the word tell. Yeah. So it's a command, right? That
A recurring theme.
and recurring theme. So why do you say recurring theme?
Because it's talking about the character, how to live a godly life, watch out
Yep.
for false teaching.
Yep. And in that sense, that theme's all across the Bible, right? In every time period of the people of God, having godly leaders to correct false teaching is the key, right? I mean, you can see it all across the book of Kings. If you have a good king, what happens to the people? It goes well. If you have a bad king, what happens? It goes poorly, right? And what's the thing that a king is? A king is either good or bad in the Bible, not because they have impressive military victories, not because they're politically savvy. There's only one litmus test for whether they're a good king or not, right?
Did right in the eyes of the Lord.
Did they do right in the eyes of the Lord, right? Did they worship the Lord and lead the people to do what's right in the eyes of the Lord? Or did they go worship false gods, right? False teaching, right? So you can see this really does pick up this pattern, right? So yeah, so it's a command, right? In some sense, who fulfilled this command perfectly? Well, Jesus did, right? Like Jesus literally appointed 12 to go and carry his message out, right? To do this. He himself is the perfect leader, right? That we really need to look to. So you can think about that recurring theme as well. You could look at like over and over again, God calls for godly leaders to lead his people. And the ultimate godly leader we have is Jesus, right? If you want to know, like, where does Paul get the character traits from? Well, he gets the character traits from Jesus in some sense, right? Like, if you want to ask who perfectly lives out the character qualifications, the only person is Jesus, right?
Technically, the entire Bible is a recurring theme. What does God ask us to do? Just believe in him.
Yep. Yeah, that's a theme, right? To trust in him is a theme, yep, right? So as we're thinking about this call to appoint godly elders and correct false teaching, we're not doing this on our own ability. We're not doing this on our own strength. We're doing it knowing, hey, Jesus has gone before us in doing this. And God has worked in Jesus to be the ultimate godly leader that we're truly called to follow, right? And as these other leaders are following King Jesus, we follow them, right? If they stop following King Jesus, we don't follow them no more, right? Because we're following leaders that are godly and correcting false teaching, pointing us to follow the true godly leader, right? So there's an example of just how, again, slowing down it's not going to change the picture, right? A Christ connection won't change your picture. What it does, it takes a black and white picture and adds the color of the gospel on top of it. If it's changing the picture, then you've got a schizophrenic God. You know, he inspired it to be one thing, but now he's inspiring it to have a totally different meaning in light of Jesus. Like, no, like he's not schizophrenic, right? It's the same message. It's just now we have this extra color to it, right? All right, so let's do this. Let's break up into our groups. You can flip over the page in your workbook to practice. It's got the instructions there for Titus chapter 2. And I'm going to give you 16, 17 minutes here to do what you did with Titus chapter 1. But then you're also then going to add this element of trying to identify the Christ connection as well. All right?